Welcome to the Disneyland Hotel. As we'll show you in the next few minutes, there's an exciting world of things to do and see. So come on along for the tour.
Hello and welcome to The Lowdown on the Plus Up, a podcast where we look at everyone's favorite theme park attractions, lands, textures, and novelties. We talk in, over, about, and through our week's topic, and then, with literally no concern for practicality, safety, or economic viability, we come up with ways to make them better. My name is Kelly McCubbin, columnist for the theme park website Boardwalk Times, and with me, as always, is Peter Overstreet, University Professor of Animation and Film History in Northern California. So, Pete.
Yeah.
What are we talking about today?
Well, today's episode, folks, is probably our hardest yet. And yes, it's only episode number 3. But I think Kelly and I, after our last 2 episodes, we decided to make a concerted effort into not just go for the easy subject matter. We decided to go for one of the most obscure and probably one of the most challenging of our episodes up to date, because I think honestly, secretly, we wanted to get this over with and do it now.
Well, I don't know about that. I think we both have very fond memories of this particular item, which is
the Disneyland Hotel.
The Disneyland Hotel. Now, I'm going to say right up front that I have a little bit of a prejudice here.
Okay.
My prejudice is that in the 90s, the Disney company bought the Disneyland Hotel, and I have zero interest in anything that happened with the hotel after that point.
I can go with that. So for those of you who are listening who are big fans of the resort as it is today, probably not going to be your program.
Probably not.
However, before we proceed, I do want to throw a little bit of kudos to at least the Disneyland Hotel staff who were there in 2011. I was there with a friend, and we were supposed to check in, and there was some sort of cheerleader convention going on at the Anaheim Convention Center. No joke. Real. Teeny boppers and teenagers and cheerleaders everywhere. And we had a reservation, which I had made months in advance, and they said, well, we're all full up.
Yeah.
And I kind of went, well, we're all the way down here. We took a plane. We got carted over here by the tram from John Wayne.
Right.
I'm not sure what we're going to do now. Maybe you guys can help me rent a car. Maybe we can find something at the Marriott or something. They said, let me see what we can do. And they went back. And we had to wait for about 15, 20 minutes, and they came out and said, okay, we would really like to apologize. We've put you in one of the suites, not one of the big magical suites, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but one of the larger suites. We've set you up in it. Very nice hotel room, and they set us up with a couple of food, dinner vouchers, and, Bob's your uncle. And they really took very good care of us, even when, and I know Disneyland probably doesn't want me to mention this, but I got food poisoning at the Blue Bayou, and they took very good care of us when we were going through that. They were like, we had mentioned on the way to the lobby, and they started sending stuff up for us, like, buckets of ice and stuff, just in case we needed that. And the front lobby actually checked on us. So the staff was great. Our story really is complicated with this one because as we researched this hotel, what we thought was going to be, okay, well, I guess we're going to talk about the giveaway soap, and we're going to talk about the little paper band they put over the toilet for your sanitation. What are we going to talk about?
It seemed very much like fact after fact after fact after fact. And you start to go, what ties this together? What makes this an interesting story?
Yeah.
And I want to take just a second. I showed Pete this book just a little while ago, but there is a book, and I referenced it a lot in this episode, and the author deserves all sorts of credit. His name's Donald Ballard.
Yay, Donald.
Yeah, and there's a book called Disneyland Hotel, The Early Years, 1954 to 1988. He's written a few other books specifically about the Anaheim Disney hotels, which is an amazing thing to take on as your subject of interest, but they're invaluable. And if you're interested in this stuff, really seek him out. I'm going to be lifting facts from him left and right.
Yeah. Well, and you bring up an interesting point is a lot of people actually consider to get that type of obsession about the hotel, because you have to be obsessed in order to write a book like that.
Yeah.
And there's we're talking good nerd obsession here, where it's I love this thing and I'm going to stick with it. Right. I'm the same way. And I think what's interesting is it doesn't surprise me that people develop obsessions about places like the Disneyland Hotel, because in its heyday, it really was something unique, something special. It was a trendsetter.
It was.
And it broke ground in so many ways. And the more I learned about it, the more I actually have a healthy respect for, what would you say the pre-year? So it's from 1956 to
1988.
88. So yeah.
Right.
So
87 is when Disney as a company, they team up with a New Zealand company to buy out Rather Corp. And there's some stickiness that goes with that, but we'll get to that. But so after 88, it is suddenly the Disney company's hotel.
Yeah.
And things change a lot.
Yeah. So this episode is going to be a little ping-pongy. We're going to be jumping all over the place with this one, because again, see part where Kelly and I were like, what are we going to do with this thing?
Well, let's go back to the beginning.
Okay.
In 1955, Walt's about to open his park. He realizes that there's not a lot in Anaheim. People are going to have to travel to get there.
At most, there was like 100 rooms total in all of Anaheim.
Right.
By the time that he was building Disneyland Park.
Right. And so he knew he needed a hotel, sort of fulfill his dream about this. Yeah. He went to some of the big players. They all said no, because
went to the Hiltons, didn't he?
He did go to the Hiltons, yeah. They said no. They said this is a crazy idea. You know, at this point, obviously, people still didn't know whether the park was going to be a success. Mm-hmm. Even if it was a success, if it was going to be enough of a success to sustain a large hotel. So he went to the Hiltons. He went to several other people. They said no. He went to Jack Rather. Rather said no. Mm-hmm. He also didn't want to have anything to do with it. Disney came back to him a few more times, and Rather he acquiesced and said, "Okay, we'll put this together."
I wonder what it took.
Yeah,
you know, like, did he walk in with the giant drawing of Ethel Roger, like, look at the park, it's going to be amazing. Bank of America said, yes, you should too.
One of the things that I think may have played into it was that Rather and his wife, Benita Rather, were friends with Ronald and Nancy Reagan. And they were actually quite close friends with Ronald and Nancy Reagan. And Walt was friends with the Reagans. Mm-hmm. Ronald Reagan was going to appear on the opening day special of the park opening. I think that it's potentially that might have been part of the deal. That might have been part of the sell.
Well, Jack, I think you better do it. Bonzo over there is really enjoying this fine hotel. Calm down, little chimpanzee. Sorry. Dad Reagan, and boy, am I a child from the 80s.
Yeah. I want to back up a little with Jack Rather, because this story just makes me so happy to tell. You know, a little bit, I think of this podcast as like Greil Marcus's Lipstick Traces book, where it just takes a little factoid and follows it that way for a while and sees if we can tease something interesting out of it. Jack Rather was married twice. Benita Rather was his second wife. His first wife was the daughter of Wilbur Lee Pass the Biscuits, Pappy O'Daniel.
What?
The governor of Texas.
Oh, my God. And you being a Texas boy, this is a big deal.
Yeah. Now, Lee O'Daniel's really interesting for a lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. He was governor of Texas. He became governor because he owned a flour company called the Light Crust Flour Company. And the Light Crust Flour Company had its own radio show. The radio show was extraordinarily popular in Texas. It featured a band called the Light Crust Doughboys.
I love them. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I love them so much. They got a great sound of that Memphis swing.
Right.
Yeah.
And Bob Wills, the king of Texas swing, started off in the Light Crust Doughboys. And their theme song was a song called Pass the Biscuits, Pappy. So Wilbert Lee O'Daniel became known as Lee Pappy O'Daniel, or sometimes Lee Pass the Biscuits, Pappy O'Daniel.
Wow.
He was extraordinarily popular. He became governor of Texas. He was not a great governor. He ended up running for senator in Texas, and this is one of the very few elections that Lyndon Johnson ever lost.
Really?
Lyndon Johnson lost an election for senator of the state of Texas to Wilbur Lee Pass the Biscuit, Pappy O'Daniel.
You know, that's like dueling charismas there.
Right.
You know, like Johnson and O'Daniel just.
And he lost by less than 2,000 votes.
Whoa.
It was incredibly close.
Holy moly.
And this is why later when Pappy O'Daniel decided not to run again, so he was coming in a vacated term, so it was a special election. So he came in, filled that election, ran one more term, and then decided not to run again. So Lyndon Johnson decided to run after that. That was like 48, I believe. And he ran against Coke Stevenson. And Lyndon, having learned his lesson from the fight with Pappy O'Daniel, fixed that election real good.
I don't want any biscuits served at this election.
He made sure he was going to win that one. Voters be damned.
How the hell did they get more gravy? Yeah, it's wow.
But so I love this story.
So great.
Lee O'Daniel shows up, as you probably know, in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, the Coen Brothers movie, where the Light Crust Doughboys are replaced by the Soggy Bottom Boys.
Yep.
Fascinating character. But so Jack Rather marries Lee O'Daniel's daughter, Mary, I believe is her name, and then goes to war. They have two kids. He goes to war, World War II. He actually sees action.
Whoa.
Towards the end of his time, which was like 44, 45, he's in action in the Pacific Theater.
Whoa.
During this time, his wife files for divorce. Now, there's all sorts of strange things about this origin story, right? Because first off, you're a Texan in the 40s. You don't really file for divorce.
No.
That doesn't happen.
That's not, making a run for Reno is not really a thing over there.
Right.
Yeah.
So you especially don't file for divorce when your husband is in the Pacific fighting in World War II.
Yeah.
But she did. And her father at that point was senator, very wealthy. And they ended up in courts for years. It fairly decimated Jack Rather.
Wow.
So his origin story coming into the 50s, which is what we're really here to talk about, is interesting. It's devastating. He's
kind of starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Midlife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the story of Jack Rather and Pass the Biscuits, Pappy.
Wow. That one blew me away.
So yeah, the 1955, Walt Disney somehow talks Jack Rather into taking on the hotel there. Rather has a whole bunch of different industries that his company owns. He's an oil wildcatter, so he owns a bunch of oil. He has a few different things. And along his career, he has a bizarre collection of industries that Rather Corp owns.
It doesn't surprise me. One of the ventures that you told me about, especially his connection to the oil industry, and having grown up part of my youth in Southern California and driving through portions of the desert and seeing the oil rigs pumping crude out of the ground, it doesn't surprise us. So tell us about this one industry that would totally probably surprise some people that he was involved with.
Are you thinking about the Erector Set Company?
Yes.
Yeah. So Jack, his wife, his second wife, Benita Rather, who we're going to talk about a lot because I think we both find her pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
She said later in her life, I believe after Jack had passed away, she said, my husband was really good at acquiring assets. He wasn't always good at making money at them.
Which is interesting because Jack Rather actually has a quote that says, there's two ways that you acquire them. You either build them or you buy them.
That's right. Yeah, it's interesting. And so he did, and this was a little bit later on, he bought the Erector Set Company, which was a German company. He drove it into the ground. It was devastating on their financial books. He ended up having to sell it off again, and then it popped right back up. And, my question to you, Pete.
Yes.
How do you screw up the Erector Set Company?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've seen older Erector. I remember having my Erector Set, and half of the parts were plastic.
Yeah.
By the time it reached our age group, they were trying to make it much more little finger friendly.
I think this was exactly the problem. I think this is actually what Rather did.
Yeah.
So he took these kind of cool metal things that you bolted together, and he decided he was going to make them. He was going to use space age polymers, plastics, and it took some of the charm away from it. It took that weird industrial kids like to watch earth moving machines charm away from it.
I can imagine him in some sort of boardroom, nuts. Kids don't need nuts. They can. In my day, we didn't use nuts. We used bubble gum, and it served us well.
But some other things that Jack Rather owned. He owned Muzak.
What?
Yeah, he owned the Muzak company.
Get out of here.
No, and they held on to that for a very long time.
That's bizarre.
Fairly successful. He also owned a bunch of entertainment properties, all of which he bought. None of these he created, but he owned the Lone Ranger. He owned Sergeant Preston of the Yukon. He owned Lassie.
Okay. Wow. Now, alternate reality. Somewhere there's an Avengers movie in which sorry, I'm making myself laugh before I do it.
He's cracking himself up.
In a world of prohibition, a Canadian mounted officer is on the track, and it takes him to the Old West, where a young boy named Timmy is caught up in a boot. Yeah, see, we got to make sure this whiskey gets on the other side of the border. What are we going to do over here? What is it now, Lassie? There's only one man who can save us now. Hi-ho, Silver! Away! Throw in a 900-year-old Davy Crockett, and we'll call it a day.
It's surprising that Davy Crockett and Sergeant Preston didn't take off.
Right.
It's
Lone
like Batman
Ranger.
and Robin right there. I'm not sure which one's the young ward.
It's probably the dog.
And so, he bought the Lone Ranger. This was after it had been a radio series and had been on TV for a while. Yeah. He maintained it and kept it on TV for a little while. It died out. He brought it back. It kind of failed. He did a movie based on it. It kind of failed. He sort of ran it into the ground. But
not as badly as Jerry Bruckheimer did.
Not as badly as Jerry Bruckheimer
But I'm
did.
just saying.
No, sir.
Anyway, you were saying, I'm sorry.
No, it's an excellent point. One of the things that was sort of associated with him owning the Lone Ranger is he's the guy. Jack Rather is the guy that gets an injunction against Clayton Moore and says you cannot appear in the Lone Ranger outfit long after the TV show's off the air.
Wow.
Clayton Moore was trying to make a living. He was trying to survive to dressing up as the Lone Ranger, as he did on TV for 7 years.
Yeah.
And Jack Rather forced him to stop.
What?
Which is not cool.
That is not cool. No.
Right. And, the Rather company is going to get its comeuppance later in a very similar sort of way. But so he did that. He didn't really make much out of the Lone Ranger. Sergeant Preston kind of died out pretty quickly after that, though Rather desperately tried to bring Sergeant Preston back a number of times, including at the hotel. Later on.
What?
Yeah, later on in 1981, they built the Sergeant Preston's Yukon Saloon. and
Wow.
and
Lots of moose heads and snowshoes and stuff all over the walls.
So it was a restaurant at the hotel in 1981. And after a while, they put a sort of like hoop-de-doo review kind of show in called Sergeant Preston's Yukon Follies.
I had no idea that Sergeant Preston went in drag.
Oh, if only.
That's right. I'm looking rather fabulous, eh?
And that restaurant eventually became like the Neon Cactus or something and disappeared. But so they were desperately like, there's a market for Sergeant Preston.
Not anymore.
And the third of those entertainment properties that he owned, Lassie.
Yeah.
That one actually did pretty well.
Yes.
It held on for a long time, and this is in a large way because of his wife, because of Bonita Rather. Mm-hmm. Bonita Rather had been a child actress, a pretty successful one, actually.
Yeah.
When she got married to Jack, for some reason, she said that she thought he was the type of person that would not want his wife going off and doing movies.
Interesting.
She didn't say it angrily. She didn't say it like, "Oh, this is something I regret." She was like, "Yeah, this is fine. This what our relationship is." So she got out of the entertainment industry for a while, but then she came back. She was producing Lassie for a while. She was voiceovering Lassie for a while. I believe she appeared in Lassie for a while.
Wait, she was the dog? I mean, that's okay. Just to translate, to dog, it translates it to "he's in the well." Sounds very different than he's down in the abandoned mine. That's very different.
And you have to know the difference.
Well, she would know a lot about mystery because it turns out she was, according to this, she was cinema's first Nancy Drew.
Oh, what? I didn't know that.
She was Nancy Drew reporter in 1939, Nancy Drew detective 1938, Nancy Drew and the Hidden Staircase, and Nancy Drew troubleshooter, all of them within a 2-year span. She was also in The Lone Ranger in 1956. She made an appearance in that. She was in a movie called Hitler's Children.
I've heard about that, and I've heard it's actually pretty good. But,
yeah. Love Laughs at Andy Hardy. Apparently not anymore.
I know she's in a version of Lillian Hellman's The Children's Hour called These Three.
Mm-hmm. She's in a lot of Lone Rangers, actually, which does not surprise me. She's in like 2 or 3, The Magic of Lassie, here she is. Mm-hmm. The Children's Hour, 1961, obviously no longer a child actor.
Right.
Those Were the Days, 40 Little Mortimers, The Wild Man of Borneo. She married.
Nothing uncomfortable about that.
Yeah, and this is my favorite. All it is, like, this is such a great title. It's just 1935's Wilderness. So yeah, that's Bonita Rather's, or what's her maiden name is Bonita
Granville Rather.
Yeah,
and that is why the restaurant that was most recently Steakhouse 55 was originally named Granville's. It was named after her. And what was the other thing that was named after her?
What?
The Bonita Tower.
Oh, wow.
The third of the 3 big towers.
Right, because there are 3 towers. That's right. There is the
Sierra.
And the
Marina.
And
the Bonita.
And then there's the Santa Maria. Yeah. No, I'm just joking. There's not a 4th tower yet. I'm sure Disney's working on that.
Christopher Colombo.
Colonialism aside, folks, we're going to move on here. We can talk about small children actually performing as dogs, but we can't actually talk about Christopher Columbus.
So she seemed to be kind of keeping the entertainment piece of the Rather Company's portfolio alive. Yeah. If not solely, like she was doing a big hunk of the work there. Mm-hmm. And we're going to find out later how savvy of a business person Bonita Rather was. She operated very much in Jack's shadow for a long time. But later when Jack's no longer in the picture, Bonita really shines.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, very much indeed. Kelly and I have kind of decided that she's kind of the heroine of this mighty tale.
That's right.
Overall. I mean,
That's right.
There's a lot of people that really contribute and they do amazing things. We could spend hours going into the actual history of the building of the hotel and all the but you know what? They did a marvelous job on Disney Plus, on Behind the Attraction. They actually do a very great, almost hour-long documentary, which, even they kind of say, like, really? This is fascinating? No, really, it's fascinating.
It's fascinating, yeah.
I would also recommend... So there's a great documentary called The Rise and Fall of the Original Disneyland Hotel by a fellow on YouTube called Yesterworld Entertainment. And he does a great job about the history and the background and so forth. And we may or may not have lifted some of those. So, dude, I don't know your name, but thank you so much for letting us borrow some of your info.
That's Werner Weiss.
That's Werner Weiss.
Werner Weiss.
Awesome. Okay, well, Werner, thank you very much.
Yeah, he's a great resource.
Yes, he is.
So they start to build the Disneyland Hotel. It is not at all what it looks like right now. It is a lot of sort of long 2-story, 3-story buildings with some restaurants. I mean, when they open, they don't open in time with the park.
Right.
When they do open, I mean, there's 100 rooms or so. Some of the rooms are being used as administrative buildings. They're scrambling.
Yeah.
But they get it open, and it immediately starts to turn a profit.
With an Olympic-sized swimming pool and a black and white television in every room, which was a luxury at the time.
It was, and one of the things that I'm really interested in is how many of these almost futuristic things the Disneyland Hotel keeps pumping in to the experience. I mean, it goes on from the beginning all the way through to when Disney buys it. He's constantly using these revolutionary technologies. It's really remarkable. And I think it's interesting because, we talk about Rather says he's to make money, you need to buy it or build it. Most of the things in the Rather company portfolio he bought, not this one.
No.
And this one, certainly the shining star of the portfolio. It's the one thing that continues to make money for most of the time he runs it. But it's also the one that he seems to be very passionate about. It's just constantly improving and constantly trying stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the innovations, like we said, not a lot of hotel rooms would sport a television set in every single room.
That's right.
And also the layout of giving people the convenience of access to so many different things while they're guests at the hotel. Because Kelly reminded me that Disneyland was not open 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
Right. It was open quite sporadically early on. And I didn't realize this until, I think it was yesterday, that it wasn't until 1988 that they completely committed to being open 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
And what an interesting coinky-dink. That's about the same time that the Disney Corporation acquired the hotel.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because we think about the Disneyland Hotel and it seems like a real no-brainer, right? It's the hotel that goes next to one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world.
As a matter of fact, most of the park industry of Disney and also rapidly catching up, Universal.
Sure.
Is built around not just the park itself, but also the resort built adjacent to or around the park.
Right.
Because Walt really learned his lesson after this experience of the Disneyland Hotel.
Right.
But we'll get to that in a minute.
So it's interesting because you think about it as such a no-brainer, but obviously in 1955 it wasn't. The success of Disneyland was in no way assured.
Yeah.
It wasn't open through the whole week. You still have to fill those hotel rooms. There's nothing else in Anaheim at that point.
Yeah, it's orange groves. I mean, at this point,
right?
It's still
right, and they tried to come up with some things to sort of attract people. There were little shops and stuff and things that were on the outside of the park that you could still kind of access. But Jack Rather had to find ways to draw people into the hotel, even when the park wasn't open, and that's tricky.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Some of the ways are the obvious things. You know, fabulous swimming pool, television in every room, air-conditioned rooms.
Yes.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. But it's also the stupid little things that we would take for granted and just say, well, big deal. I'm just going to go down to the street. But you have to keep in mind, in Anaheim, there wasn't going down the street. A lot of the streets were still kind of
Orange groves.
Yeah. I mean, if you drive down Catella Avenue now, it's, you've got the Peter Pan Hotel and the convention center and so forth. Oh,
right.
Catella Avenue, which was used as one of the entrances for the Disneyland Hotel for some time.
Yeah.
Did you know that that's actually named after somebody?
No, I didn't.
It's named after two little girls, Kate and Ella, and their house literally resided on where that street begins, right at the entrance. While they were building up the berm and scraping out all of the land and getting rid of all the orange trees, there's this little farmhouse, this little charming Victorian house. They picked it up and they moved it, and it sat derelict for some time, and then it was finally moved closer to downtown Anaheim.
Right.
And it was purchased by two Disney artists, Kevin Kidney and Jody Daly.
Okay.
Who have restored it. And it's this, I've been a guest in their home a couple of times.
Oh.
That's a different story for another time of how I met them. And it's very charming. They're wonderful, wonderful guys. But they welcomed me into their home and they fully restored it to its original glory. And they told me, yeah, Catella Avenue, it's named after the two girls who lived here, Kate and Ella.
I had no idea. I'd never heard that before.
So that's where that's all about.
The Lowdown on the Plus Up is a Boardwalk Times podcast. At boardwalktimes.net, you'll find some of the most well-considered and insightful writing about the Walt Disney Company, Disney history, and the universe of theme parks available anywhere. Come join us at boardwalktimes.net.
I had this thing where I was like, I'm going to make a list of all of the sort of futuristic, for the time, things that they put into the Disneyland Hotel. Some of this stuff seems very trite now, but at the time it was revolutionary.
Yeah.
You, as you said, black and white TV, air conditioning, big deal. Infrared heating, which is that crazy kind of heating that you put in bathrooms to keep things from setting on fire.
Oh, wow.
They used to have modern fashion shows every Thursday.
Oh, wow.
The lobby had a suspended fireplace, which you don't get much more mid-century modern than that.
It's gorgeous. I mean, for those who've never seen video, it is spectacular.
Yeah, there's some great pictures of it. It's really cool.
It's like, I really want to have a cup of coffee in front of that. I really do. And I don't even drink coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I might argue that I don't know any place that was as mid-century modern and remained as mid-century modern as long as it did as the Disneyland Hotel.
Yeah.
It just, that to my mind, that's what that aesthetic is. They had their own radio station.
Oh, yes. KEZY.
Right. It was in the lobby for a while. The helicopter landing pad. Of course, the most famous thing, the monorail.
Ah, yes, the monorail.
Yeah.
I remember, I was telling Kelly, it was the first time I ever saw color TV.
Yeah.
It was at the Disneyland Hotel, and that was the same visit. We talked about this during our first episode with Great Moments of Mr. Lincoln. That same visit, when I'm shouting at Mr. Lincoln, in order to get into Disneyland, we would just walk across the fabulous little garden pathways from our room, and you've got the sound of mourning doves. I always remember. I can smell the Disneyland Hotel with all of the kind of petrichor and the mourning doves. And because they've just, the staff has just washed down all the walkways, but still it's like it's a fresh rain, it's a fresh day, beautiful summer day. And you just walk underneath this one little alcoved area with these beautiful gingerbread details all over the building. And there's like a gift shop right there with the air conditioning kind of starting to come out.
Right.
And you have the rumble of the air conditioning. And then there's the rumble of the monorail coming right overhead. And it's like, that's how we're getting into the park.
Yeah.
It's interesting that when I went, we went in on the monorail for the first time. And the first thing we did, like we saw Tomorrowland. It's like, here we are in Tomorrowland. Okay, now let's get on the train.
Yeah.
What? And then we took the Disneyland Railroad through the Grand Canyon, through the Primeval World, and straight off. And then we got off the train.
Oh, wow.
Rather than walking, because my parents wanted me to see the monorail. They wanted me, because it gives you this fabulous overview of the park.
Yeah.
And as a kid, I've got my little booger-laden nose pressed up against the plexiglass, like, wow, look at that.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. But to have that convenience that close, it made you feel so special.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a guest here, and I've got a special ticket. Like, this is our secret way of getting into the park. It was, even though it really wasn't, secret, it felt secret.
It did. It felt very special. Yeah. It felt futuristic. I was at Disney World in January and took the monorail out of the Contemporary. It goes through the lobby. And I'd gone over to see the Mary Blair mural and
the five-legged goat.
Yeah. I took a picture of it.
Yay.
That mural's magnificent. I mean, it's like 9 stories tall. It's crazy. But I got on the monorail and it snaps you right back to that feeling of you had as a kid at Disneyland, or I had as a kid at Disneyland, where you got on the monorail and you were in the future and you were going to Tomorrowland.
And now you have to get on it. What used to be the Rainforest Cafe right above it.
Yeah.
And hey, if you dig it, you dig it. For me, it doesn't have that same powerful oomph of, oh boy, this is something luxurious about this. I mean, and you have the trams too. You have the little gas operated trams that would take you up to the front gate. And welcome to Disneyland, and over here you'll actually be dropped off in front of the happiest place on earth. And you're like, okay, that's fine. And
it's interesting to me how much the monorail factors into our feelings about Disneyland as a whole.
Yeah,
I can't imagine the park without it. It just seems so fundamental to me.
And it's interesting. It was such a feature that at the Disneyland Hotel, they actually put in a lounge.
Yeah.
The monorail lounge.
Yes.
That was actually themed all around just the monorail. That's how much it meant to that hotel.
Yeah.
And how much it meant to the ethos of it. Of course, my sixth sense of humor kicks in. And I kind of think, well, if it's everything needs to be single file. Everything, everybody's sitting next to each other, and but all joking aside, it really is integral to that hotel, and it's interesting that it's almost the bridge between the park and the hotel itself.
And the monorail is going to factor in later in this story.
Yeah,
when we run into the person that's actually going to be the villain of our story today, a young man named Michael Eisner. Now, don't turn us off. I'm not against Michael Eisner.
Again, complicated because he does some good stuff. He really does.
Absolutely.
And then after a while, he kind of wears out his welcome.
No one had supported Imagineering as strongly as he did when he came in.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But he does something a little bit brutal towards the end of the story, but we'll get there.
Okay, so we had all these innovations. What were some other... Now, the Disneyland experience of the Disneyland Hotel, or the Hotel Disneyland.
The Hotel Disneyland. Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, so I believe it's in the early 60s, and I'm sure some expert is going to pop in on our comment section and give me the actual year.
1962.
1962, they begin the construction of the first tower.
The Sierra Tower.
The Sierra Tower, which features a fabulous glass box elevator that gives you a fabulous view of the park and boasts the view of the fireworks.
Right.
The only problem is the way that it's designed is that the way that it faces on the main road, the elevator breaks up the facade of the hotel.
Right.
It cuts straight into it, this awkward, like 3/5 into the
It's exactly 3/5. So it's 3 rooms on the left side and 5 rooms on the right.
I was just guessing.
No, but you got it. You totally nailed it.
That's awesome.
And
so it says Hotel Disneyland instead because they could
hotel
fit
with a lowercase h too, which is really interesting.
It's so weird. But it's so when I grew up, I was like, we're going to stay at the Hotel Disney because I always thought it would be like the Hotel Chez Panis, the Hotel Disneyland. I thought it was like them being pretentious. Yeah, I thought it was being pretentious or something. Like, no, they just
got it wrong. And and they fix it later. They build a thing called the Tower Annex, which is basically an extension. It's really another tower that they kind of link it up. And when they do that, they're able to flip the sign around and it's okay. And you have to keep in mind that it's not just the tower. Right now, the hotel is pretty much the three towers.
Yeah.
But it wasn't at the time. There were a lot of lower buildings sort of spread across the landscape there.
It was quite a complex.
It was.
Well, you look at aerial shots of the hotel and you see the tower and then you have these weird kind of the smaller buildings and they're kind of weird S-shaped little villas, kind of thing. And that's one of the things I remember is just the layout of the place and how big the layout of the resort actually is. You think, oh, it's a hotel. It's just a big deal. No, actually, you can get blisters walking around this when you're a kid because it was actually really, really big, including the gigantic swimming pool, the lagoon that they installed, and all the other attractions that they built to keep kids entertained, including one of the first video game arcades.
That's right. Yeah, I love the names of that arcade. So it's like kind of below water level, like you have to walk down.
Yeah, the water would
to
splash up against the windows of this thing.
And I just, what was it? It was the video adventure.
Yep.
And then it was the video arcade. And then it was the Atari adventure.
That's the one I remember, the Atari Adventure, where I finally got to see the Tron stand-up arcade game for the first time. And, of course, this is people mover time of you have entered the realm of Tron. Different episode for the future. But, they really were trying to, that pursuit of making the Disneyland Hotel a location in itself, a resort in itself, not an integrated part of the park. And I think this is where I want to put a pause on our diving into the history here.
Okay.
Because I want to at least share what I have a problem with as it is now. I mean, we already gave kudos to all the people that work there. You guys are marvelous.
Yeah.
But the thing that gets me is when I leave the park, I do reach a certain level of overwhelm.
Yeah.
Even when I was a kid. I mean, this is probably my ADHD kicking in, but I just reach a point where I go, I've had enough of the fireworks. I've had enough of ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I've had enough. I've had enough of the crowds, and I don't really want to see Disneyland anymore. It's like cleansing the palate.
Yeah,
like when you're testing perfume, you smell coffee grounds, or you eat apricots when you're sampling wine, or whatever that is that you do to cleanse your palate. You need that, and even though they had Mickey Mouse stuff all over the park.
Sure.
All over the Disneyland Hotel.
Yeah.
And even though they had their own little entertainments, it was not so saturated where the minute, these days, when the minute you're in the hotel, it's Disney stuff everywhere. Bronze Mickeys and Imagineering. Now, don't get me wrong. I love all the reproductions of the Imagineering art because, like, oh boy, look at that.
Yeah, totally.
But it is a constant barrage of Disney. Even the Muzak is "When You Wish Up," and it's like, just stop for a minute. Just stop.
Right.
And I think that's what made it such a delightful oasis where it was like, yeah, it's here. It's part of the park, but it's not all Disney all the time. And I think that's where the hotel itself has gotten lost. Now, some of the Florida hotels have carried through that.
Yeah.
I think it's not the Del Coronado. There's a whole South American themed hotel that I stayed at when I went to Florida. I cannot think of the name of it right now.
Yeah.
But a marvelous place. And of course, it was so marvelous, I forgot the name. But anyway.
Well, I stayed at the Port Orleans French Quarter
Yeah.
when I was there, and there's not much.
Yeah, there's some Mickey here, and yeah, they've got, gift shops with all the last-minute purchasing stuff, but it's not this barrage the way that the Disneyland Hotel is now.
Well, and this, it leads into another one of the innovations that they brought in, which was the dancing waters. I think, tell me if this is your experience. My experience is that anyone that went to the Disneyland Hotel in the 70s or 80s, if you ask them about it, they will talk about two things. They will talk about the dancing waters, and they will talk about the little remote control boats.
Yes.
That's everybody. And that's what I want to talk about, too. I love those things.
They're fantastic. They're some of my favorite memories.
And the dancing waters, the music was not necessarily Disney music.
No, they used a lot of classical music.
Yep.
They even did Somewhere Over the Rainbow as part of the music.
Yeah.
So, okay, here's my first fastball at you.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay, history fastball from Professor Overstreet.
Yep.
When was the first exposition of hydraulic pumped water's time to music shown to the public, and who invented it?
I do not know. I'm going to guess it was the late 1800s.
Okay, that's actually better than I thought you would do. Okay, so that's actually way better than I thought you'd do, because a lot of people, including our friend over at Yesterland, will quote it as originally being a German show.
Yeah.
From 1948. It's actually much older than that.
Yeah.
Okay, so open your papers, kids. We're going to travel back in time here.
I think that the German thing specifically was that they took this specific show.
Absolutely.
Like these actual pieces came from this one German guy.
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Our inventor does not come from Germany. The earliest known, now there have been many fountains in the past, going back to the 18th to the 16th, earlier.
Yeah.
All the way back to Roman times. Hydraulic pumped water fountains is nothing new at this point. It's centuries, millennia old.
Yeah.
But the timing of water to light and sound is what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
The first person to do it is one of my favorite people in history.
Okay.
And I talk about him endlessly. And if any of my students are listening, you know exactly who I'm going to be talking about.
I'm really excited.
Yeah. So this fellow started off as a circus performer.
Okay.
Actually, he trained as a monk, and he didn't like the whole celibacy thing, so he got into engineering.
Okay.
In which he trained himself, and he was fascinated with hydraulics. He was 6'9".
Okay.
He was incredibly strong.
Okay, so just like us.
Just like us. He was one of us tall guys, except he was able to lift his entire entourage in the circus. He was, on his shoulders. He was he was known as the Paduan Samson. His name was Giovanni Battista Belzoni.
Okay.
Giovanni Belzoni is... This guy makes Indiana Jones look like nothing because he was not a very successful circus performer.
Okay.
Because he wound up in Great Britain, where there were tons of strong men and women.
Yeah.
And learned pigs and fireproof women, etc. Thank you, Ricky Jay.
Yeah, I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah. And so he and his wife and his coworker tried something else. And what they tried was building a prototype for a new type of fountain that could be coordinated with a magic lantern.
Okay.
In which you could project images.
What year are we talking about again?
Water. This is Giovanni Belzoni.
What year?
This is 1820s.
Okay.
This is Napoleonic era.
Wow.
Okay. And so he's timing it with, colored lights, through colored glass.
Yeah.
And small siphoned flanges in order to make mist and small fanned bits of water.
Okay.
Totally hydraulic. And he would, like a big guy like him, underneath these tiny little water organs, as he called it. And the water organ, which he later developed into a spook show as a phantasmagoria effect,
right?
Which would later become the great-great-great-grandfather of Disney's World of Color,
right?
At Disneyland, of projecting images on the backs of huge spouts of water.
Right. Ironically, the thing that shut the fantasy waters, dancing waters down.
Right. That's really wild. Yeah. So it comes full circle in a way.
Right.
So anyway, Belzoni's life is crazy, and we could devote a whole show to him, but I'm not gonna. But I will tell you that he moved to Egypt.
Okay.
And because one of the people who saw his water organ show was somebody who was so impressed by it, he says, one of the pashas over there wants to meet with you because he wants this in his garden. So Belzoni packed his bags, sold everything he owned, took his wife and one of his assistants from the circus, went to Egypt, built it with a contractor down there who did shoddy work. The thing exploded and killed 2 people.
Oh, no.
And so he was destitute.
Yeah.
And he got hired by a man named Henry Salt from the British Museum to move the fabled head of Memnon, which is this giant 7-ton granite head of Ramses the Great.
Wow.
Away from the flooding Nile. And he's also the man who excavated Abu Simbel. After resting for 3,000 years, he was the first person to set foot in modern times within the great temple of Abu Simbel on the shores of the Nile.
Wow.
He also discovered probably more tombs than anybody else in the Valley of the Kings.
Right.
He was responsible for transporting the Rosetta Stone. Yeah, he just had a knack. He's a very controversial figure in our time, and he is going to come up again. I do want to devote some more time to him.
Okay, I'm fascinated.
But he also, in his own special way, invented the theme park.
Oh, wait, do tell.
Okay.
You can't leave that one hanging out there.
Yeah. I mean, he's not the only one, but this is the one where, a themed attraction.
Right.
So there was a performance venue that was originally intended to be a music hall in Piccadilly in London. Mm-hmm. And because of the craze that had happened for those who are trying to put a time period, think of Bridgerton. This is the time in which, all the dress. So when you're thinking of what people are wearing at the time, just imagine all the actors and actresses from Bridgerton walking around with that type of, Jane Austen kind of look.
Right.
But in Piccadilly Circus, there was this place called the Egyptian Theater. Uh-huh. And it was this mastaba-style facade with hieroglyphics and carvings of the gods. And when you arrived, you went into the lobby, you bought your ticket, and you would be met by somebody with a lantern. Mm-hmm. Follow me, Saib. I will show you around. And you would, walk around, wrong country, but you know what I mean.
Sure.
So look, it's Great Britain in the 1820s.
Yeah.
The colonialism and racism is rampant. I'm literally going off of what I've read. Okay, so I'm just telling you. So as you leave the lobby, the entire interior of the place was built up as an Egyptian tomb, the tomb of Seti I, which also Belzoni is the first archaeologist, and as far as we know, the only archaeologist to have ever actually encountered a real, honest-to-God, booby trap.
Really?
He almost fell into a pit that was meant to either kill or sequester somebody like an oubliette when he was entering the tomb of Seti I. Wow. And that's where he found the fabled alabaster sarcophagus. And there's no mummy in it. It's just this beautiful, solid piece of alabaster. When you put a torch in it, lit up like a lantern.
Wow.
It currently resides in Scotland in a private collection. But anyway, you would go and see all these artifacts he brought back. They would have snake charmers with real cobras performing. Yeah. You would have little glass cases with scorpions. You'd have an ibis, have a monkey, a couple parrots. Exoticism at its extreme. Everybody came, including royalty, showed up at this. And at the end, you would then be led into the theater. And he would do a mummy unwrapping where you really got to see a real mummy being unwrapped. And you got to meet Belzoni himself, and he would introduce himself. Right. And so they built this whole themed attraction around, we're going to transport you to an ancient tomb, and you're going to meet a real mummy. So you get to know what it's like to be me.
Right.
And he only did that for 5 or 6 years, and then he died. Going
the 1830s?
Yeah, 1830s.
Yeah.
Literally died, I kid you not, going to Timbuktu. and he died of cholera or something like that. He died of some sort of disease, but very interesting fellow. And we're going to talk more about him another time.
Yeah.
Here's a hint. It's going to have something to do with the Haunted Mansion.
All roads lead to the Haunted Mansion.
All roads lead to the mansion at some point. But anyway, so that is the guy who gave us the water organ. And so if you really want to look at origin stories for Dancing Waters, even though the Dancing Waters was open in 1970, and then it became Fantasy Waters in 1970 to 1979, which is when we knew it.
Right, yeah.
And then it became Water Wonderland. It finally closed in 2007.
Yeah.
So it had a hell of a life.
It did, yeah. And I know when it became Fantasy Waters, I think that was when they started putting like fiber optic stuff behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They used to have characters that were just illuminated characters, kind of like our you can buy things like this at Home Depot now for your Christmas decorations.
Right, but it used to be super fancy.
Yeah, back then it was like, hey, it's a big deal. But I remember going to that thing, and I think part of the charm for me was we've had a long day at Disneyland, or we've had a long trip all the way down to get here.
Yeah.
We'll check in the hotel, we'll get some dinner, let's walk around, get our yayas out. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, hey, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the Dancing Waters is about to begin. Yeah. And you gather around. And I remember seeing kids walking around with blankets from the hotel room, and they're all wrapped up.
Yeah.
And they'd have a Coke or something like that from the vending machine. And they'd watch the show, and it was like, okay, kids, it's time to go to bed. And it was kind of it was almost like the hotel's lullaby for me.
Right. There was something calming about it.
Yeah. It was very sweet and very charming and delightful about it. And then when you woke up, you were wanting some taste of Disneyland. And so most of us would go to breakfast and we walk out. And as soon as we're done with breakfast, we're all jacked up on our French toast shaped like Mickey Mouse and all of our strawberries. Yeah. Even though we had our bacon and eggs like Mom and Dad told us to have, we would go out and then we would see the lagoon. And you'd see people running around paddle boats. They had paddle boats on the lagoon. Right. That kind of stuff. And then there was this little alcove where you would kind of walk down these stairs, and they had these ship's wheels, steering wheels. Right. And you plunked in 50 cents, and you got to pilot a remote-controlled tugboat.
Right. And so the interesting thing about these boats is one of we talked about earlier, the Rather Corporation owned a lot of different things.
Yeah.
One of the things that they owned was the Queen Mary. That was actually one of the few things that stayed profitable for them.
I did not know that. That's amazing.
Things got really tough. And so that is why the little tugboat attraction was called the Queen's Berth, because those little boats circled around a reproduction of the Queen Mary.
Wow. Yeah, so let's talk about, okay, we're going to do history one more time.
All right.
So the remote control boats, for those who don't know, you basically paid for I think it was 3 minutes worth of time.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And you had to get used to them. So the first 50 cents is a waste of money.
Right, yeah, you just blew that.
You're like left, right, I don't know where to go. And basically it would just turn the motor on and then you just steered this thing. Right. And you could go reverse if you bumped into something and forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you learned very quickly, don't pick the boat that's surrounded by 6 other boats when you start. Because you're going to spend 50 cents just to get it out of there.
Yeah, and sometimes that was the only one that worked.
Right.
In the later years. Okay. Kelly, who invented the remote control boat?
No idea.
Okay. I'll give you a hint. Mm-hmm. It was not Thomas Edison.
Okay. Was it Nikola Tesla?
Yes, it was.
Hey!
1898 at the Electrical Exposition in Madison Square Gardens. Nikola Tesla presented his most recent invention, the Tel-Automaton.
Oh, okay.
So it's a device that was a radio remote-controlled boat. It was roughly 3 feet in length with blinking antenna light, and it was propelled by a small motor and a rudder. Backwards, forwards, at a single speed, and steerable. And it was remote controlled in 1898. That was Nikola Tesla.
So what was the mechanism? They have radio waves?
Yeah, so this is basically, yes, he's utilizing basically binary code in radio wave format, because you've got Marconi,
Yeah.
And all those, and of course, all of the, DeForest and all these other guys working with radio telemetry and so forth.
Yeah.
But it was Nikola Tesla who said, well, what if I make this frequency yes and no? What if I turn yes and no into left or right?
Yeah.
And backwards and forwards. It's simple binary. Backwards, forwards, left, right.
Right.
And then in the middle is stop.
Yeah.
Or straight. So that was his whole premise. And I've seen pictures of it. It's a very crude little black boat. It wasn't like a replica of anything. It was just, it floated. It was black. It had this big antenna jutting out the top that received it. And the light on top blinked to show that the battery was still on. God only knows what kind of battery Nikola put in that thing.
Right.
And I certainly wouldn't want to put my feet in the water anywhere near that thing when he was operating it. But
do you have an impression of when you first used those boats?
Yeah, and it's roughly around the early 80s. By all sources that I found, it's a company called Thola Productions.
Okay.
Thola Productions, their involvement with Disneyland Hotel began in 1984.
Oh, all right. Well, there you go.
Jack Rather was still alive, and his company still owned the hotel. And their first remote-controlled tugboat attraction anywhere, the Queen's Berth, featured 22 remote-controlled tugboats, islands with interactive events, and a scale model of the Rather-operated and later Disney-operated Queen Mary as its centerpiece.
Right.
And then, roughly about the same time that the Indiana Jones adventure, the Temple of the Forbidden Eye, and the refurbishment of Adventureland took place.
Yeah.
They reestablished it as the Safari Adventure.
Right, and this was after Disney had taken over the hotel.
Yes, and so it's very different.
Right.
And
it looked really neat. I never got to do this.
It had a gorilla crossing a bridge. It had a section of a temple that breathed fire,
which is cool.
Like all the kids were always trying to ram into it to make sure that like the boat would catch on fire and stuff. I know I certainly tried that a couple times. And it looked great. And I always desperately, but I mean, even back then, I desperately wanted a remote control Jungle Cruise boat.
This month at Boardwalk Times, we're writing about the new multi-launch coaster at Shanghai Disneyland, how Paris's Walt Disney Studios Park is being rebranded as Disney Adventure World, and there's new episodes of our Multiverse of Marvel and This Is the Waycast pods. Come check it all out at boardwalktimes.net.
There's so much about the hotel that does exactly the thing that you were describing earlier, which is it gives you the decompression time.
Yes.
It gives you the step away while you don't feel like you're missing out because there's things there.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a zillion restaurants there, and there's these activities, and the marina itself is beautiful, and all the lagoons and rockworks around the Bonita Tower were beautiful.
Yeah.
And you had the giant horseshoe falls that people going into the Bonita Tower kind of walked along the upper lip of, and that was gorgeous. And the dancing waters, and it really felt like an attraction in itself.
Yeah.
And I wonder if anyone feels that way about the Disneyland Hotel now.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us back to the villain of our story.
So let's talk a little bit about what happened.
Okay.
Actually, let's reassert our hero.
Yes.
Bonita Granville, rather.
Yes.
And then assert our villain. So after Jack Rather died, he'd been running the hotel for a long time. Mm-hmm. It was one of the things that was consistently profitable for him. Mm-hmm. A lot of his other industries were not, and it started to fall off. The oil wildcatting was kind of over for him. Mm-hmm. The entertainment properties were sporadic at best. Mm-hmm. He'd driven erector sets into the ground. And towards the end of his run, he had built a new convention center in the hotel. Now, this is not the Anaheim Convention Center, the city built, because that's huge.
Yes.
This was something else. But he sunk a lot of money into it. And the debt was really dragging on him as he needed to keep expanding.
Yeah.
Now, along the way, he had discussions with the Disney company about them buying the hotel. He was interested. But the initial talks they had fell apart because the Disney stock price had taken a real tanking, and they had wanted to pay partially in stock. And the stock wasn't as valuable anymore, so they had to renegotiate. That kind of fell apart. They tried to do it again a few years later. That fell apart. Then Jack Rather passes away.
Oh, and just as a real quick little insert here, also what's happening around the perimeter of the park are all the Johnny-come-latelys, which really irked Walt.
Oh, yeah.
Of all of the other themed hotels, the Peter Pan, the Cinderella, all of them saying, yeah, it's a Disney hotel, kinda.
Yeah, and by this point, they're glutted. They're everywhere.
And there's no way that Walt can afford the land to expand any further because they're surrounded by this moat of tourist hotels.
Yeah, and you know what's really interesting? I thought this was a really sweet touch. After all these hotels came in and basically ate up Anaheim, and Anaheim just grew exponentially, one of the very few places you could still find orange trees was the Disneyland Hotel.
You're right.
Yeah.
Right.
They actually kept them, which was, I thought, really sweet.
It is, yeah.
And so they eventually, Rather died. Bonita Rather takes over.
Yeah.
And she basically rolls up her sleeves and says, all right, we got to get out of this mess. They're sinking in debt. A lot of their other properties are losing money.
And their son took over for a while, didn't he?
He worked with his mom, and then I think took over after she passed away.
I see.
And so Bonita starts selling off hunks of Rather Corp. And so she sells off Muzak. They also owned teleprompters. That company. She sells that off.
Wow. Okay.
She sells off Lassie and the Lone Ranger and Sergeant Preston of the Yukon.
Wow.
And eventually they get to a point where the only thing they own is the Disneyland Hotel and the Queen Mary. That's it. But their fortunes are starting to turn around. She's unloaded enough debt that she's actually able to start funding the reconstruction, the refreshing of the Bonita Towers and new building. So she is starting to turn it around. They actually turn a profit for the first time in many years.
Wow.
So Bonita Rather, smart cookie.
Yeah.
And at this point, Michael Eisner has come into the company after the company almost got split apart in a hostile takeover.
Right.
And he decides that he wants the Disneyland Hotel.
Yeah.
So remember how Jack Rather told Clayton Moore he could not perform as his alter ego? Like he couldn't take on the identity that he made famous as the Lone Ranger?
Right.
Well, Michael Eisner threatens to take away something that is part of the identity of the Disneyland Hotel. Oh. Michael Eisner tells the Rather company, tells Bonita Rather, that the lease on the monorail is up.
Oh.
And that he is going to, and some of this is intimated, some of it's said very plainly, but he is going to raise the price so that it is beyond the ability for the Disneyland Hotel to pay.
Oh, man.
And yet, Bonita Rather continues to fight on. She's like, I'm not taking this deal. I'm not taking this deal. They're coming up onto this point where the lease is about to run out.
Yeah.
And a New Zealand company steps in. And this New Zealand company buys out like 26% of the Rather stock. So they now own a hunk of it. And
why am I suddenly imagining,
Yeah.
You have my sword and my bow and my axe. Cue the Hobbit music. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. And so what Eisner does is, so he's threatened this company that Walt owed so much to.
Yeah.
They haven't buckled. He joins up with the New Zealand company and says, between the two of us, let's buy out a controlling interest in this stock.
Wow.
So they do. The two companies then tacitly own Rather Corp, and then Disney buys out the New Zealand company. Oh. And they own the Disneyland Hotel and the Queen Mary. No, I mean, the raising of the price of the monorail is a villainous thing to do.
Yeah.
Whether or not it really worked out for Bonita Rather and her son, hard to say.
Right.
But it did get kind of forcibly taken away from them.
Yeah. That, it is the kind of aggressive entrepreneurship.
Right.
That Eisner was actually famous for.
Yeah.
And it did actually help the company pull out of a very bad time for itself.
Yeah.
So you can't fault him entirely. It's just when it comes to us kind of revering this place that has been built by the Rathers family, for us, for this particular story, it is actually kind of a destructive act.
Yeah.
That does, and yes, there were some things that were done to the hotel that were in those early times under Michael Eisner's reign.
Yeah.
The things got interesting, like the marina was rethemed to kind of a Captain Hook look. That was the Neverland Pool, which opened in the summer of '99.
Right.
The head of that project was Tamir Galen, the senior VP and manager of Disney Imagineering.
Yeah.
And he worked with Anaheim on the Convention Center expansion in 2000, actually.
Huh, okay.
Which was in place during the creation of Downtown Disney.
Yeah.
He has since gone on to other great things. But Galen is very much like Eisner.
Yeah.
Very like this is, and it's weird. It's this dichotomy of big business thinking and yet trusting the creatives. Because this is also the time when Toontown is being built and when the Fantasyland revitalization is going on. And frankly, Eisner and Tony, if you're listening, please contradict me. But it seems like Tony Baxter's thinking kind of melded quite well with Eisner's thinking of how we can expand and how we can move forward.
Yeah.
Enough where we got a lot of great innovations at the park itself and some things that were glimmers of hope at the hotel.
Yeah.
And then somewhere around 2000, right around 2010, things completely changed.
Yeah.
And that is the year when I think they were still kind of holding on to some of the Rather ethos, even though it had already kind of gone over to the Eisner, very much Disney. Like there were still little vestiges of what once was. Little things here and there, but it was just the slow deterioration of it.
Right. Like the Neverland Pool is sort of lovely, but it was built on the absolute destruction of the marina.
Agreed.
Yeah, and so it's like, okay, this is still nice. We have the replacement for the Queen's Birth remote control ships with the cool Jungle Cruise remote control ships, which came in that. So there's still elements of it. At what point did the Dancing Waters go?
Dancing Waters finally closed in 2007. So that was one of the first casualties of the old times. The boats were gone in 2010.
Yeah.
As was Hooks Point and Wine Cellar.
Yeah.
That was gone. This is the one thing, and this is going to be a whole other episode.
Yeah.
But I will say that there is one thing only right now for me personally at the Disneyland Hotel where I go, yeah, baby, it's the Tongaroa Terrace.
Okay.
And Trader Sam's.
Yeah.
Like, there you go. That, boom, that for right there really encapsulates the good old days of the Disneyland Hotel.
Yeah, because you've got that Polynesian thing that both Disneyland as a park and the Disneyland Hotel just loved.
Yeah.
Like they dipped into it every chance they possibly could.
Oh, yeah. And mid-century abound. And it's interesting that, Walt had a love for that type of a thing. Strange note. So as of recording this, this is April 8th of 2024. Tomorrow's my birthday.
Happy birthday, Pete.
Thank you. But this last weekend, we mentioned him during our first episode, Bill Burns, who is a cosplayer from Morgan Hill, goes to the park dressed as Uncle Walt.
Right.
So he went for Dapper Day this last weekend.
I saw pictures of him.
And he looked great. And I guess he was staying at the Howard Johnson Hotel. And the guy at the front desk says, wait a second. Are you going to Dapper Day? Like real nervous. Are you going to Dapper Day? Yes. Are you the guy who dresses up as Walt Disney at the park? Well, yeah. We're going to upgrade you. And they put him in the House of the Future suite.
Oh, I've been in that suite. I haven't stayed there because I do not have that kind of money.
Right.
But I've been in there for an event, and it's wonderful.
And they gave it to him.
That's amazing.
And there's tons of pictures of him right now floating around on social media of him as Walt working on paperwork at the table. And it's like this look back in time. And that's on that same trip, Bill also got a tour of the firehouse.
Oh, wow.
And what I'd love to do is I need to find somebody who looks like Jack Rather and just have him hanging out.
How many people would know?
We would.
I would, yeah.
This would be entertaining for the 12 people who are listening and us, But, that's the kind of stuff that brings you back. And that's what I love is that type of – the fact that Howard Johnson's hangs on to that type of aesthetic, but the Disneyland Hotel just has to inundate you with the glittering stone floors and all the stuff.
I know.
It's like even the rooms are just the suite that they gave us was nice when I stayed there. Yeah. But the whole headboard is this giant fiber optic light show over the bed. And it's like, I can't. It's too much.
First off, let me say that Howard Johnson's is lovely.
Yes.
I went to an event there, got to not stay in, but go with some people and tour the Suite of the Future. And it's nice. It's really neat. I guess it's just a passion project from the guy that owns that particular hojo.
Great.
Heather, the communications head for Howard Johnson's, is a lovely woman. Hello, Heather.
Hello, Heather.
I'll see you when I'm there in September. But I agree with you. And I want to tack on to that point because it's a point that I've been wanting to make. Yeah. So we were kind of going down this list of all the advanced stuff things, the futuristic stuff things. Let me hit the last bits of them. The Sierra Tower itself was the nation's tallest post-tension lift slab building that was almost never done until that point. Wow. External glass elevator that went to the top of the park. You mentioned it earlier, like very, very rare. Wow. At the time, it's all over the place now. A thing called the Concorde Interwrite system was an internal hotel system where they could send text messages to each other. This was in the 60s.
Wow.
Discover the scientific marvels of soundproof air walls, missile-age communications, Muzak television and radio in every room. That was an ad. In 1969, 2 cosmonauts and 1 astronaut stayed at the same time at the Disneyland Hotel. One of the first computerized check-in systems for a hotel. Microwaves was a rare thing that they put in 1970.
Wow.
Color TVs in every room, as you mentioned. Yeah. Muzak in every room. The arcade, the dancing waters, the first internal hotel television network.
Yes.
The convention center had the first of its kind air filtration system and a closed circuit TV studio that could broadcast to the center or to hotel rooms from the convention center.
Wow.
First use of satellite to relay live programming to be cablecast at the other end. The Speaker of the House in Washington cablecast to a convention at the hotel. I know, right? 1978, a thing called ODP, Online Distributed Processing for Hotels, the first use in California. The Bonita Tower was the first hotel to utilize solar water heating. Right? 1978. The fiber optics in the water show. The I can't believe we haven't talked about this. The giant art multi-structure laser installation, Still Green by Rockne Krebs. Do you know about this?
Yes, I do remember this.
Yeah. Crazy multi-laser thing that shot off of all the buildings, and there were mirrors that reflected it.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Closed circuit system expanded to allow the cable cast of the convention center activities to other Anaheim hotels, all done through telephone lines.
Wow.
I mean, this stuff is nuts. They were at the cutting edge.
Yeah.
They were doing so much. And I throw this out there as you were talking about the House of the Future suite, because do you know what the three towers are now named? You know, they've
changed them.
They changed the names.
What are they named now?
So now they are named, the Sierra Tower is now called the Adventure Tower. The Marina is called the Fantasy Tower. Mm-hmm. The Bonita is called the Frontier Tower. What land's missing?
Tomorrow.
Right.
What?
So this is a complex that has built itself on looking to the future.
Yeah.
And not anymore.
That's bizarre. Yeah, I looked up the crazy, the very expensive, every fan wants to stay there but probably can't afford it suites, the 5 suites.
Right.
Adventureland, the Pirates of the Caribbean, the Mickey Mouse Penthouse, the Big Thunder Suite, and the Fairy Tale Suite.
Yeah.
How come there isn't a Suite of the Future?
How come there isn't a Suite of the Future?
Wow.
Why does the Howard Johnsons have a Suite of the Future?
Right.
And the Disneyland Hotel that was built to be modern. It was built to be forward-thinking. It was built to be the hotel of tomorrow.
Yeah.
They're abandoning it.
That's a real interesting thought. That's really.
Yeah.
So I think, speaking of tomorrow, unless you have more that you'd like to bring up.
No.
I think we've actually reached the point in our broadcast where we're going to do what this whole show is all about. We're going to do what makes it special. And we're going to find a way how to plus up the Disneyland Hotel.
Oh, this is tough, and I'm going to make you do it first this time because I had to do it first last time.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, 2 things. The one thing that I keep latching on to, I mean, we've talked about this ad nauseum and on this broadcast, but I do want to actually stress that the thing that is missing that I would love to have them bring back is that sense of emotional and input reset. Mm-hmm. More so now than ever, because, hey, look, Disneyland Corporation, please keep the souvenir stands, keep Mickey's Kitchen, keep, all that's fine. Goofy's Kitchen, keep it all.
Yeah.
Okay, please, that's fine.
Yeah.
However, we need something to just give us a chill out moment at the Disneyland Hotel. Mm-hmm. And I'm not suggesting you bring back Dancing Waters, but I would love to see them actually bring back the Safari Adventure boats, because it's a perfect tie-in to Tongaroa Terrace.
Yeah.
So that's my first. The second one is actually, oddly enough, exactly where we ended, which is an acknowledgement of Tomorrowland. If Howard Johnson's can do it, then we need something there that acknowledges that mid-century charm that the original hotel had, rather than just saying, forget the past, forget it. It's like, what do you mean forget the past? That's all you have are suites dedicated to the past.
Yes.
You have, 18th century pirates, you've got Victorian colonialism and Adventureland.
Right.
You've got Fairy Tale madness, and you've got Big Thunder. For goodness sakes, you can have a mid-century modern suite and make it sexy and elegant.
So this is exactly my plus up as well. So we're going to meet on this.
Oh wow, we're like Siskel and Ebert with 2 thumbs up on this one.
Yeah, except they never agreed.
No, they never did.
But yeah, I think that it is reasonable at this point. Let me say this a different way. Optimism is useful.
Yes.
And it is worthwhile to consider that the history of the Disneyland Hotel is about optimism about the future.
Yes. 100%.
And I think we're going to run into this as we talk about a lot of things as the podcast goes on. Putting in something that is optimistic about the future, even if it is a retro optimism.
Yes.
So it leans back into that mid-century modern thing, which is hip again now.
Yes, it is. And 100%. And going back to the past, Americans especially have a long history of looking to the past in order to look to the future.
Yeah.
We went through that with a obsession about the 18th century during the bicentennial.
Yes.
We went through that with a love for the more recent activities of kind of looking wistfully at the 20s, kind of the Gatsby era.
Yeah.
We're kind of upset because that is now a century ago.
Right.
And we're almost, reaching a point where we're about to hit the 60s again. But I don't think we're going to be hitting the 60s as a lot of people think of the Flower Children and that sort of stuff. I think we're going to actually hit a retro push of mid-century modern,
I think you're right.
1958 to 1962 kind of approach, which is going to be very, very fascinating.
Yeah.
So
I 100% agree. I think that, and I'm not saying that you have to redesign the entire hotel in like pastels and stuff like that, though it might be cool. And I'm not saying that you need to convert a bunch of the restaurants so they're serving ham and aspic. Like it's not necessary.
Why not? I love ham and aspic. No, I'm just joking.
But
aspic's nasty.
but I do think there's something to. So, I like I was saying earlier, I was in the Contemporary Hotel in Florida, and I went to see the Mary Blair mural. Yeah. Now, you don't get much more mid-century modern than Mary Blair.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this thing, and it's huge, and it was moving. There's an optimism to it. There is a childlike simplicity to it, in spite of the fact that I know it's intensely complicated to have made. More of that, please.
I think that's something that we're going to, as we look back, as we continue to make these shows, and whenever we have a moment and we look back on our work, I think we're going to run into this as a common theme between you and I with a lot of our plus-ups. I mean, we can have our big, massive fantasies, but I think you and I are certainly of an era of Disneyland fans who and theme park fans in general, not just Disney, but all the theme parks.
Yeah,
that optimism is part of the deal.
Yes,
optimism is totally part of the deal.
Right,
and I think that is something that is starting to. I think we're getting so caught up in the technology and the innovations, and don't get me wrong, they're spectacular,
of course.
But if you miss out on the human element of optimism, that kind of misses out on the whole dang point of what Walt was trying to do.
I 100% agree. And if we want Disneyland as an entity, as a resort, to have an identity that's recognizable and distinct from any of the other theme park resorts, that's it.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, this has been one hell of a ride for something that we thought was going to be innocuous and boring.
I was nervous about this.
I was sweating bullets.
Yeah,
like trying to get to our studio here to record this. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this one, but I actually think this was very, very fascinating. Quite a journey for us. And the next time we get together, we'll talk about something else.
That's right.
So until then, my name is Peter Overstreet.
And I'm Kelly McGubbin.
And you have been listening to The Lowdown on the Plus Up. I got it right this time.
You did. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Lowdown on the Plus Up. If you have, please tell your friends where you found us. And if you haven't, we can pretend this never happened and need not speak of it again. For a lot more thoughts on theme parks and related stuff, check out my writing for Boardwalk Times at boardwalktimes.net. Feel free to reach out to Pete and I on our Lowdown on the Plus Up Facebook group, or send us a message directly at comments@lowdown-plus-up.com. We really want to hear about how you'd plus these attractions up and read some of your ideas on the show. Our theme music is Goblin, Tinker, Soldier, Spy by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. We'll have a new episode out real soon. Why?
because we like you.